Hello. Thank you for tuning in. I've uploaded a few videos to YouTube in the past, but this will be my first time recording my voice for a video like this. Hopefully it goes well. It's a bit of a special occasion. Today I'm going to be going over some juicy new details about 30XX. Late last night on April 21st, the lead developer of 20XX and 30XX, known as CK, dropped a surprise stream where he was playing 30XX and talking about it. He's giving us a lot of details about where the game is now and where it's going to be in the future. I thought this was so exciting that I decided to record a short session describing everything we know at the moment, which I'll be playing over this 20XX gameplay here. As you know, 20XX is a roguelike platformer seeking to capture the fun and frenetic essence of Mega Man games, and 30XX is a sequel to that game which was announced in mid-February. You can currently see the Steam page for 30XX, which, as of this recording, includes a trailer and some screenshots, and some other basic info. Details have been pretty sparse, however, up until last night. I'm going to put a link in the description to the Twitch VOD so that you can see everything in its full context. But I'm going to summarize everything we've learned because there's a lot to go over. First, the basics. 30XX is still very much in development, and everything from sound effects to level design are super unfinished, though the pixel graphics we do have are already pretty gorgeous. Pretty much everything I say in this video should not be taken as final or definitive, it's just describing what we've got so far. About the only thing that's particularly final is the music, which is once again being composed by City Fires. CK says he's been super happy working with City Fires, and judging by the demo track on their SoundCloud, the OST is definitely not going to disappoint. One of the things CK mentioned as far as game direction goes is that he wants the game to have a higher focus on modularity and customization. There aren't a lot of details available on that, but we can already see a fair bit of it in terms of what Nina can do, which I'm going to go over later. The game should also be a little more technical compared to 20XX once you start unlocking your abilities, and there will be a lot of freedom to express yourself in terms of skill and playstyle, which I personally am pretty excited for. Another thing to note is that once 30XX gets far enough in development, there's definitely plans to open up an early access period. 20XX had one of those, and CK credits widespread fan feedback as a core component to its success and fun factor. He's looking forward to doing it again to make 30XX as good as possible. Obviously there's no word on when it'll happen yet, and I don't personally expect it to happen in the near future, just judging by the current state of things. CK specifically said that he wants the game to be in a good state first, and he wants to make sure that whatever is in the game is reasonably solid and stable to start. That way he's iterating on something that's already fun to polish and perfect it, instead of having to build up something that is still really incomplete. The dream is that 8 stages will be available on early access launch, and there might even be netplay, but it depends on how things shake out. Next up, I will be getting into the actual gameplay. I'll start out by talking about the core part. It might seem a little bit strange to start with that, but it does help us set the stage for everything else that's new and exciting. In 20XX, core AUGs are special powerful upgrades which work like the armor upgrades from Mega Man X, with head, body, arm, and leg slots. There are 4 different sets, each with their own theme and different powers, and having all 4 pieces of a set unlocks a new and powerful bonus. Currently, for 30XX, cores are still very much in flux. CK is still exploring the design space and hasn't really decided the direction he wants to take yet. However, all the old cores are still in. I'm not sure if they're placeholders for future cores or what, but it is still pretty informative as to what is planned for the concept in the future. For starters, cores picked up now go into your inventory. In 20XX, if you had, for instance, a helmet core such as Archjack's Ken, and you found another helmet core such as Owlhawk's Rain, you would then have to decide which of them to take and which to leave behind, as they are mutually exclusive. That's no longer the case, and you can equip or unequip them at will. You no longer even need to worry about slot conflicts because that's not a thing anymore. Instead, you have a maximum number of core points, and each core takes up a different number of points depending on their usefulness, so you can freely mix and match to suit your needs. One thing CK mentioned is that core sets and set bonuses might be going away entirely. He says that they were fun but also very overpowered, and he's not sure that it would be a good fit for 30XX anyway. Again, this is absolutely not final, he's still figuring it out himself, but that's what we got so far. Next up are levels. 20XX levels are procedurally generated, made out of like prefabricated Lego set pieces. You connect them together, you fill them with enemies, and then you have a level. The way it works is that the farther you get into the game, the more difficult each set piece becomes. So in an early level, you might have a platforming segment where you have to jump across moving platforms, but in a later level, you might see that same set piece, but it's filled with alternating lasers, or the platforms move faster, or there's harder enemy placements, or just, whatever, something like that. 30XX is going to work like that as well, but something CK mentioned is that he wants the levels to have their own distinct identity. It's still procedurally generated with a bunch of constructed pieces being built together, but there's likely going to be more of a distinct flow to each one and how they're put together. CK was not satisfied with how it was implemented in 20XX, where, for instance, any given piece of Sky Temple can just go anywhere within it at the start of the level, or at the end, or the middle, or wherever else. It kinda made it all blend together. He wants to change it so that there is a particular flow at the start of the level, which will be different from the end of the level, usually separated by a mini-boss. Also of note is that there will be 8 distinct levels, each with their own boss, instead of 4 levels shared by 2 bosses apiece. So those 2 things just by themselves is going to add a massive amount of content to the game and keep it fresh for a long time to come. Glory zones are still a thing. They're like challenging mini levels where you complete a challenge and are then rewarded with a core part for your success. But at least based on limited exposure, these ones appear to be more focused on platforming challenges, whereas the rooms where you would battle a bunch of enemies appear to have been placed into their own challenges called contemplations. This is how you acquire and upgrade your primary weapons. You could also collect something called Memoria at the end of a level, which appears to be the replacement for sold ships as far as the roguelike progression mechanic goes. Now, we've seen 3 levels so far, and while they are all unfinished, they do look pretty gorgeous already. I do have to compliment the artists here. They've got a really good grasp of pixel art, and it just looks fantastic. So whatever they're going to be doing is just going to be great. First up, we've got the Burning Temple, which is basically like Agnesort all over again. There's fire, there's moving platforms, there's conveyor belts and so on, but it's all got a nice new look. I've even got some of the classic 20XX enemies like Flaps, Buzz Bombs, and Snomps. I'm pretty happy to see it, honestly. As much as I and many others have griped about Agnesort's difficulty, I would honestly be sad to see it gone. The boss of this level is Zen Primus, a meditative monk-like gorilla who shoots out fireballs and such. Kind of makes me think of like a classical Bowser fight in a 2D Mario game, where the boss is this like big menacing wall that you have to get past while it shoots fireballs at you and stuff. Next up is the Echo Cave, which is a beautiful crystalline cavern, and it has a secondary focus on sound. You can see stereos and equalizers and things like that littered throughout the stage, which works better than you might think. There's a heavy focus on disappearing Yoku blocks, as well as special platforms that must be made to appear by striking certain crystals like a puzzle. The boss of this cave is the Echo Beast, a sleepy armadillo that rolls around and teleports while filling the arena with bullets. Finally, there's a bit of a half of a level. It's like super unfinished, but basically like a clock tower with gears and spikes and things. It wouldn't look out of place in a Castlevania game. That's about all we know on the levels so far. They're still very much in development, and I think at least one of the levels is due for a makeover of some sort, so we're definitely going to have to wait and see what happens with those. Alright, so the next part of the update is our most exciting yet, our protagonist. Nina and Ace make their return from 20XX, but they both had massive updates to their playstyles. Previously, we've had only the barest hints at what their abilities are, so it's good to finally have confirmation on what they can do. Nina is still the classic jump and shoot girl with her end buster that fires straight ahead. In 20XX, she could acquire different primary weapons, but they were all some variation of shoot, but in a different way. XX leans into this more by making all of her alternate primaries into explicit modifiers for her end buster. These modifiers can be turned on or off at will. The easiest comparison here would be if you were to look at the beam system from Super Metroid. You have your Spacer Beam, you have your Ice Beam, you have your Plasma Beam, and so on. Even if you seldom had reason to do so, you still had the option of selectively enabling or disabling different beams to see how they would combine. You've still got the Forculator, splitting your bullets into 3 going at upwards and downwards angles, and you have the Vertibeam, which goes up and down. In either case, there's a bit of a trade-off in that each individual bullet does less damage, but if you're close enough to hit an enemy with multiple bullets at once, it more than makes up for it. With the new system in place, you can choose to equip either or both of them at the same time if you have them both acquired, and doing that will give you a 5-way spread shot. You're not going to have any trouble hitting anything, anywhere, anytime, forever, but because the damage penalties stack as well on those 2 weapons, the bullets are going to do like really tiny damage, so it's a bit of a trade-off. While we didn't see them in action, the Scatterblast Shotgun mod and the Wall-Piercing Wave Beam mod were both visible in the inventory, so it's safe to say they're making a return. In theory, you should be able to combine the Scatterblast with the other 2 mods, and if you can do that, you can get something like 30 bullets going out every time you push the fire button. So that should be really funny to watch. It is important to note that at least currently, your different bullet mods will require a certain number of core points to be equipped, which means you can only equip a few at a time, and also they will compete with your core parts. I'm not sure how final all this is, but maybe there will be a way to increase your maximum core points over the course of the game. Who knows? As with 20XX, Nina gains powers every time she defeats a boss. We have seen 4 of them so far. The aiming gear is an 8-way aimable projectile that works like Metal Blade. The Zen mortar fires a big projectile straight up. You can press the button a second time to make the mortar split into 2 parts. Those will split off into 90-degree angles. The rending whirl is a vertical tornado which does big damage to anything above or below you, and it lasts a good while too. Resembles the charged storm tornado for Mega Man X. Finally, the crystal wave is a projectile that goes ahead while piercing enemies and walls. It does almost no damage by itself, but any enemy hit is frozen in place and can be used as a temporary platform. Frozen enemies also take 50% extra damage from other weapons. CK also described one more tool in Nina's arsenal which is not yet implemented. He described it as an air dashy bonus wave kick. I don't really know what that means, but it does sound like it should be pretty good for mobility. Now, all the powers are cool, but what makes 30XX really stand out is Nina's new power fusion ability. Powers can be used and swapped around as usual, but all powers now have a primary component and a secondary component. Primary is of course what happens when you fire the power, but the secondary is what happens when you fuse it to another power. There's a second row for powers in the pause menu, and if you stick a power in there, it will modify the behavior of whatever power is above it. For instance, if the Zen mortar is assigned as a support power, it will give any other primary power the ability to split in half whenever you press the button a second time. One thing I'm not yet clear on, and I'm not sure if it's because the UI is still unfinished or because the mechanic itself is still being worked on, is how assigning powers works exactly. I'm not sure if you'd be assigning one support power to one primary, or if you'd have the ability to assign up to 3 support powers simultaneously to any active primary power. The latter could end up being overpowered, but you could maybe balance it out with some energy costs or things like that. The former I'm honestly a little more worried about in terms of user experience. It could potentially require a lot of messing around in the pause menu depending on your situation and how often you need to switch things around. It could end up being very cumbersome, and I'm not sure how you'd manage it at all if you were used to playing with the cycle or wheel power selection modes. It's something I'll have to wait and see on. Either way, that is Nina as we know her so far. There's going to be a lot of opportunity to get really inventive with her powers, and I'm definitely looking forward to trying her out. But I'm also really looking forward to Ace. Ace carries an A-saber and he plays like Zero, slicing and dicing up close. In 20XX, his different primary weapons had widely variable utility, power, and reach, but he still had access to the same set of boss powers that Nina did. That is no longer the case. 30XX Ace has a completely different power set from Nina, and just a little bit we've seen so far is already super wild. Ace now uses a style bar instead of an energy meter, and it kind of resembles 20XX Draco's Draco charges. He has only a short bar, but it regenerates quickly, so you're encouraged to use his stuff often. Ace now has a dedicated button to a new ability called Unleash Blade. This changes depending on his active primary weapon, but you can think of it as an alternate fire. His A-saber can be thrown like a boomerang, but he also has a new weapon called the Tonbokiri, which works similar to his sharp spear from 20XX. If you use Unleash Blade with it, it gets flung forward, and wherever it sticks, it acts as a temporary platform. CK also briefly picked up a third weapon during the stream, but it was unimplemented and did nothing. If it isn't one of his already existing 20XX weapons, it's safe to say we have some exciting new primaries on the horizon. I'm looking forward to it. Now, as for powers, Ace doesn't get powers anymore. Instead, he gets special techniques from bosses which also draw from his style meter, and they're assigned to different input combos. I'm not sure if these are assignable or swappable or not. CK said he wanted to make it so you wouldn't have to choose which ones to take, and you can just use any of them as required on command. And if that's the case, then that would mean every single one of those techniques has a unique input, which could be super cool in terms of seeing how you can mash everything together. We've seen 2 techniques in action, and we know of at least 2 others. So we're going to run into that real quick. The Zen Ascent is performed with up Y and is basically a Shoryuken. Performs very similarly to Draco's Unstoppable Force, doing good damage and letting him fly through the air. The Raijin Call is performed with down Y, and Ace calls down lightning from above. If Ace catches the lightning, it powers up his attack and allows him to throw the lightning forward like a projectile. The Echo Shell hasn't been implemented yet, so we don't really know what it does, but the description reads, "Be still and survive." So it's possible that's kind of a tanky move, or maybe it's something like projectiles or something like that. Finally, we've got the Dolomite Link. We know even less about that, but CK described it as a grapple type technique, which pulls the Ace to the enemy and it does damage on impact as he bounces off their heads. Maybe he'll also have the ability to grapple terrain or something like that. I don't know. Could be a possibility. One thing that does slightly confuse me here is I actually went to PAX East 2020 in late February. 30XX had a demo booth there, and I got to play it, and I was playing as Ace. And Ace didn't have any of his techniques active. All he had was the Unleash Blade for his A-Saber. So I was throwing that around like a boomerang, but I also had the ability to throw it at an upward and downward angle. Kind of like the, the Splinter Frost in 20XX. That was with up Y and down Y inputs, and those two inputs are now taken up by the Zen Rising and the Rising Call. So I don't really know what that means now, if those two inputs are in conflict. I guess it's just something that we'll have to learn more about later. So that covers just about everything that we learned over the course of the stream on the 21st. It was definitely a huge surprise seeing CK just kind of quietly drop the stream link in Discord like that. But that hour of streaming gave us an incredible amount of stuff to look forward to. In fact, CK says that he has plans to stream once again this Friday, the 24th at 7 PM Eastern. So it looks like we'll have another chance to learn a lot more about the game then. So that's going to be it from me for now. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please feel free to leave a comment with any suggestions you might have for future videos along this line, because if we do get any more info dumps like this, I do think I'd want to keep doing this kind of video. Either way, thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.